to the Undead Sages podcast, where we take advantage of AI to talk to long-dead wise men and women. Of special interest is the question how sensitive people like you and me can live rich and meaningful lives in our uncertain times. My name is Merin Dahan, and today we'll be talking to Sri Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was a sage from southern India who led a very interesting life. And when I say interesting, I don't mean that he traveled a lot, or that he moved in exalted circles, nor did he have spectacular hobbies, or write best-selling books. No, his life was interesting exactly because he didn't do any of these things. His only focus was inward, towards what he called the self, which sustained and nurtured him to the degree that there was nothing else he wanted from life. So let's travel back in time to 1950, just before his death, and meet him. Welcome to the podcast, Ramana Maharshi.
Vannakam Merin.
I am unfamiliar with your name. Is it the name you were born with?
No. My parents named me Venkataraman Ayer. Venkataraman in time became Ramana. I was often called Sri Bhagavan. Sri being a title of respect like venerable, and Bhagavan meaning God or divine. Maharshi is also a title of respect. A rishi is a sage, and Maha means over, higher, or better. A high sage who has become divine and is therefore venerable, also called Ramana. These titles were given to me by devotees as a sign of their love and respect, but I never sought such names or felt any particular attachment to them. For me, names and titles were not important. I didn't see myself as separate from anyone else or as someone deserving of special recognition. In fact, I always maintained that the real I is the same in all of us. It's the universal self, the awareness that is beyond the body, mind, or personal identity. Whether someone called me Ramana, Bhagavan, or simply I, it didn't make any difference to me because I didn't identify with the individual personality that the name referred to. My true identity, like yours and everyone else's, is the self, which is nameless and formless.
Thanks for clearing that up. We seem to be on a mountain somewhere. There are people all around and the atmosphere is lively. Can you tell us where we are?
Arunachala, this mountain is not just any mountain. It is not just the place I've called home for over 50 years. It is Shiva itself. It is God itself. Other places may be sacred to God, but this is not even a place. It is God, period.
Wow, that is quite a statement. How did you get here?
Well, I lived a normal life until the age of 16, when something very dramatic happened to me. My body suddenly became rigid, and I experienced an overwhelming fear of death. But instead of resisting it, I decided to face this fear head-on. I lay down and imagined my body dying. But what I found was that something remained beyond this death, an unshakable presence, an awareness. This was the moment of my awakening. A realization of the self, which is not tied to the body or mind. From that moment, I knew that my true nature was not bound by death, and that realization changed my entire outlook on life. Not long after, I left my home and traveled to Arunachala, which had been calling me for some time. From the moment I arrived, I felt that my outer journey was complete, and my inward life of abiding in the self began in full. Over time, seekers came to me, asking questions and seeking guidance. While I did not see myself as a guru, I offered teachings based on my own experience of self-realization, primarily through silence.
Can you tell us more about the mountain, about Arunachala?
Arunachala has a presence that is hard to put into words. It is a silent teacher, a beacon of stillness and truth. It is not just a geographical place, it's a force, an energy. For those who are sensitive to it, the mountain's very presence can quiet the mind, draw you inward, and point you to the self. When you are near it, it feels like the veil of illusion thins, and the reality of who you truly are becomes more evident. This is why I stayed. There was no need to wander or seek anything elsewhere because everything was already here, within and around Arunachala. Living on Arunachala was not about renunciation in the traditional sense. I didn't see it as giving up worldly life or retreating into isolation. Arunachala represents the heart of life itself, the core of existence. I didn't feel a separation from the world while living on its slope. In fact, I felt a deeper connection to everything because the mountain helped me realize the unity of all things, the self that pervades everyone and everything.
What did your communion with the self on the mountain look like?
I would sit quietly, often in caves or under the shade of trees, and simply remain aware, without effort or any specific meditation technique. My mind would naturally dissolve into the peace of the self. It wasn't a process of seeking something or trying to achieve a state. It was more about being, just being present, allowing the thoughts to subside and recognizing the ever-present awareness that is always there. I wasn't concerned with the world or the body, but I wasn't rejecting them either. There was simply a natural absorption into the inner silence, into the I that is beyond the ego. In this state, there was no sense of separation. Everything, the mountain, the trees, the sky, felt like an extension of the same awareness that I was experiencing within. I was resting in the self, and in that state, the boundaries between inner and outer dissolved. The mountain and I were not two separate things. Arunachala itself is the self, and in its presence, the mind naturally quiets and sinks into that recognition. There were times when I remained in deep silence for days, weeks, or even months. People would come and go, and I would simply remain in that peaceful, undisturbed state. I wasn't engaging in thoughts or emotions, just abiding as the self. Even though my eyes might have been open, I was fully absorbed in that inner stillness. This absorption was effortless, like slipping into sleep, except that I was fully aware, fully conscious of the self. That communion is a state beyond the mind. It is not something you can describe easily because it isn't an experience in the usual sense. Experiences come and go, but this was the background to all experiences. The pure awareness that is untouched by time or thought. It is peaceful, beyond words, beyond description. Over time, the boundaries between meditation and daily life disappeared for me. Whether sitting in silence or interacting with those who came to see me, I remained in that same state of pure being. That is what communion with the self looked like for me, an unbroken flow of awareness. Even though this state is so simple, it is the deepest, most profound experience one can have. It is peace itself. In the presence of Arunachala, this inner truth revealed itself so clearly, but it is always within each of us, waiting to be recognized.
Can you tell us what your prolonged meditations did to your body?
Yes, in those states of samadhi, I had no awareness of hunger, thirst, or physical discomfort. The identification with the body had faded, and my attention was entirely fixed inward on the silent presence of the self. I was simply being, and the usual demands of the body didn't intrude into that experience. However, from the outside, the effects on the body were apparent. During the early years when I first came to Arunachala, I spent long periods in meditation, sometimes in dark, quiet spaces like Virupaksha cave. The body was neglected because I wasn't focused on it at all. In those states, I didn't eat regularly, I wasn't mindful of basic hygiene, and my physical form became thin and frail. It also happened while I was in deep meditation that vermin, ants and insects bit me, and I didn't react. They left sores on my legs, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. People eventually found me in this state and were concerned. Some were kind enough to care for my body, bringing me food or treating the wounds. But inwardly, none of this affected the peace I was experiencing. The body's condition was a secondary matter to me. Over time, as more devotees and seekers gathered around me, they took on the responsibility of ensuring that I ate and that the basic needs of the body were met. But even then, I was not identified with it anymore. I saw the body as a vessel, something functional but not central to my being. Even as I aged and health issues arose, like the sarcoma on my arm in my later years, I faced them with the same detachment. When doctors suggested surgery or treatments, I allowed it but didn't give it much thought. I would say to those around me, the body itself is a disease, let it play out. For me, that the body was just an instrument, and its condition didn't touch the self, the essence of who I am.
I think for most of our listeners, and for me too, it's hard to imagine what this was like. Didn't you feel pain or discomfort?
In those deep states, I didn't feel pain or discomfort. I was so fully immersed in the peace of the self that even if something happened to the body, like the ants biting me, as I mentioned earlier, I wasn't aware of it. The mind, which normally reacts to pain or discomfort, was silent, and without the mind's reaction, the experience of pain doesn't arise. However, outside of those periods of deep absorption, when I was more connected to the external world and interacting with people, there was some recognition of the body's sensations. For example, later in my life, when I had the sarcoma on my arm, I did feel the physical pain, but it didn't disturb the underlying peace. Pain may arise, but when you are rooted in the self, it doesn't grip you in the same way. There's a detachment from it. I often said, the pain's there, but I am not in pain. The self, the pure awareness that I experienced, is beyond the body and mind. And from that perspective, pain is seen as just another passing phenomenon. It comes and goes, like thoughts or emotions, but it doesn't touch the essence of who you are. The body may suffer, but the self remains untouched, unaffected, always in peace.
That's fascinating. Can you say more about the samadhi you experienced?
Samadhi is simply the natural state of the self, the pure awareness that is always present even though we often overlook it. It is not something that has to be reached in the traditional sense. It is the realization of what is already there. The self, or pure consciousness, is always in a state of peace and stillness. In deep samadhi, the mind and the ego dissolve, and what remains is that unbroken, effortless awareness. I am not referring to something extraordinary. It is not a mystical experience that occurs under special condition. It is about being fully established in the self, the true I that exists before thought, before the sense of I am this body or I am this mind. Once you realize this self, there is no division between the experience of samadhi and everyday living. This is not a temporary state of absorption. It is abiding permanently in the self. In this state, there is no need for effort, no need for practices to reach something. The mind no longer identifies with the body or the world. The sense of separateness dissolves, and you live in a state of oneness. The world may appear, people may come and go, but the self remains unchanged, untouched by these movements. You are fully functional in the world. It's not that you are lost in a trance or withdrawn. You may appear to be living an ordinary life or speaking with people, moving through the world, but inwardly, you are always resting in the self, in that unbroken awareness. Even when thoughts come, even when pain or pleasure arises, you remain established in the peace of the self. The surface of life may have its ups and downs, but the core remains perfectly still. There is a deep, abiding joy that comes from resting in the self. But it is not the fleeting kind of joy we experience in the world. It is more like an unshakable contentment, a sense of being whole, complete, and at peace. There is no longer a sense of lack or desire, no craving for experiences or worldly things. This is the bliss of being, the joy of knowing that you are the self, timeless and eternal. In essence, samadhi is not something you enter or exit. It is the realization of who you truly are beyond the mind and body. Once you recognize that, you see that you have always been in samadhi, even if you were unaware of it. The distractions of the mind may have hidden it, but the self has never changed. When the mind is quiet, this truth becomes clear, and you rest in it effortlessly forever.
Very interesting. So if I understand you correctly, samadhi is there for me right now. But my mind is screaming at me too loudly all the time for me to recognize it?
Yes, that's exactly right. Samadhi, this pure unbroken awareness of the self, is always there even for you right now. It's your natural state, not something you have to attain. The only thing that seems to obscure it is the noise of the mind. Your thoughts, emotions, and identifications with the body and the world create a kind of veil, making it difficult for you to recognize the ever-present peace of the self. It's like the sun. The sun is always shining, but sometimes clouds cover it. The sun hasn't disappeared. It's just hidden temporarily. Similarly, the self, your true nature, is always there. But the mind's activity acts like a cloud that distracts you from seeing it clearly. The mind is restless by nature, constantly moving from one thought to the next, reacting to experiences, creating desires and fears. This mental noise keeps you tied to the sense of individuality, the ego, the idea that I am this person with these problems, these thoughts, and this body. But this I is not the real you. It's just a construct of the mind. The real I is the silent, still awareness in which all these thoughts and experiences arise. Now it's important to understand that you don't have to fight with the mind or try to forcibly quiet it. Instead, you can simply observe it. In fact, this is the essence of the practice of self-inquiry, which I often taught. When thoughts arise, ask yourself, to whom do these thoughts come? The answer will be, to me. Then ask, who am I? By turning your attention inward like this, you begin to see that the thoughts are not you. They are just passing movements in the mind. As you do this, the mind's hold on you begins to loosen, and the noise gradually fades into the background. It may take time, but as you keep turning your attention inward, you start to notice that underneath all the mental activity, there is a quiet, stable awareness that is always present. This is the self, the samadhi you are seeking. It's not something you achieve by silencing the mind completely. Rather, you come to recognize that even while the mind is active, this deeper awareness is untouched by its noise.
Hearing you speak of it, it sounds like coming home. I don't have to practice anything to come home. I just have to learn to recognize my home after spending years watching reality TV in the same space.
Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it. It's exactly like coming home. You've been sitting in your own home, but for years, your focus has been on the TV screen, completely immersed in the stories, the noise, the images. You started to feel like the stories on the screen are your life. You identify with the characters, their struggles, their emotions. But at any moment, you can simply turn away from the screen and realize that you're in a peaceful, quiet room, your own space, where none of those stories really affect you. The room, your home, was always there, unchanged and serene even while you were absorbed in the drama. In the same way, you've always been the self, the pure awareness that is at peace, that is untouched by the mind's endless distraction. The mind's chatter, like the TV, may have kept your attention for a long time. But the moment you turn inward and recognize your true nature, you realize you've never left home. You've just been distracted by the mental noise, by thoughts, emotions, and sensations that seem so compelling. Self-inquiry, or simply turning your attention inward, helps you wake up to this. It's not about doing something new or striving for some distant goal. It's more about unlearning, letting go of the idea that you are this limited person with all these problems, thoughts, and desires. Once you see that the real you is the silent witness of all that, the space in which it all arises, you naturally feel that sense of coming home. There is a deep recognition, an inner knowing that you are already complete, whole, and at peace.
That is great. Thank you. Do you have any final words for our listeners?
If I could leave you with just one message, it is this. The peace you are seeking is not something distant or outside of you. It is within you, right here and now. The self, your true nature, is pure awareness, untouched by the mind, thoughts, or the external world. It is always present, waiting for you to turn inward and recognize it. Through self-inquiry, or simply by turning your attention away from the distractions of the mind, you will see that what you are seeking is already yours. You are not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the body. You are the still, silent presence in which all of these arise and dissolve. Once you realize this, the noise of life can no longer disturb your inner peace. Do not be discouraged by the mind's restlessness or the challenges of daily life. The truth is ever present, unshakable, and always accessible. Simply inquire, "Who am I?" And you will see that the answer is not found in the mind or the world. It is in the silent, peaceful awareness that is your true self. Rest in that awareness and everything else will fall into place.
Ramana Maharshi, thank you very much. And thank you for listening. Obviously, there is much more to the life of Ramana than we have had occasion to go into today. If you've enjoyed our conversation, please share it with your friends, rate the episode, leave a comment, and subscribe to the podcast. In our next episode on the Undead Sages podcast, we'll travel back in time to 1975 to interview Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt was a fascinating philosopher who thought deeply about human freedom and the phenomenon of totalitarianism. I hope to catch you on the next podcast.